Welcome back to r/neighbors from hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors, and if you are new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community, and without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the next one is titled, "Neighbor constantly trespassed on my property and exploited me." Last fall we moved into a new house and less than 2 weeks later had a baby. We were pretty focused on the whole parenting thing and failed to notice how often the neighbor on one side was using our property for several things without any kind of permission or discussion. It started with his kids spending their days in our driveway drawing with sidewalk chalk. We had to ask them to stop because we seriously feared running them over when backing out of the garage, as they have absolutely no supervision or regard for cars. They stopped drawing and started using our garage door as a bumper stop while riding their scooters and bikes. They physically bashed into the garage door and dented it. I asked them to stop. After a dozen or so instances, they finally stopped. In the spring, we noticed that the dad was parking his trailer on our side of the property between our two driveways. The property line is very clear with fences and different types of landscaping. In addition, he was pulling his garbage cans through our gravel and making huge tracks. As we are in the middle of a pandemic and we have a baby, we decided to write a note and leave it with our information while also lining the property line with large rocks. Never heard from them, but they had moved the rocks into a pile at the front of our side of the property. We moved the rocks back again and thought we had made our position very clear. At the beginning of June, the dad/husband came and rang our door. He proceeded to tell us that because he has parked his trailer like that since he moved in and no one has cared before, so we cannot care either. At no point did he ask if he could park on our side or use our property. He said, "It has never been a problem and I should be able to do it." We politely said we did not give him permission to do so and explained that we intended to landscape the area and his trailer and use of our property would ruin the landscaping we had planned. The entire conversation was difficult because he spoke over me the entire time and talked to me like a child. At the end of the confrontation, he said we were rude neighbors and stormed off. Since then, he parks further over, moves our landscaping rocks constantly, and aggressively moves his garbage cans through the gravel, leaving marks like he was zigzagging back and forth. This weekend I started taking photos as proof of his parking and the way he is ruining our gravel with his garbage cans. He came out and glared at me. I, very nicely again, asked him to stop. He replied, "Why?" And when I said because it is my property and we have asked him not to, he replied, "Whatever," and walked away. Now we come to today. I am done. I am so frustrated that this guy feels like he is entitled to unquestioned use of property that is not his. And also guys, in this story we once again see one of my favorite arguments of entitled people, the magical "I have always done this, so I can just continue to do it," which obviously stems from former neighbors who have simply never intervened when this neighbor was doing this BS. And in my opinion guys, that is why it is always so important to stand up for yourself, because it will not only make the situation easier for yourself, but maybe also other people in the future. And the next one is an update to the neighbor trespassing on my property and exploiting me story. It is a very happy update. I drafted the letter with some legal assistance. Prior to sending it, I wanted to ensure I had proper cameras in the event he decided to make things worse. When I installed the camera, the neighbor must have realized why it was installed, because they stopped doing all the annoying stuff. Then, about a month later, they listed their house for sale. They have moved out and we don't have to deal with their entitled butthole attitude anymore. I appreciate all the assistance and support, as I was really unsure if I was going in the right direction. However, I also want to clarify, I don't believe that the neighbor moved because of anything I did or asked him to stop doing. I think he had been planning to move for some time and was just an absolute dick of a person. They didn't move because of me, and even if they did, they sold the house for $200,000 more than they bought it 3 years ago, so he is not some kind of victim. I do appreciate all the kind words. I am also bummed that so many people have crappy neighbors as well. And guys, if you have crappy neighbors but still want to support my channel, I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and maybe we can once again reach 1000 likes. That would be absolutely awesome and it would help me tremendously because currently for some reason YouTube is not recommending my videos to my existing subscribers even though it is the same content. But either way, I don't want to bore you with that. Let's move on to the next one. Thank you so much in advance. And the next one is titled Neighbor Gets Fenced Out. A little background. My current place is a fairly new build back to some woods and was empty for a bit before we moved in. My neighbor has a corner lot, also backs to woods, but is a bit odd shaped since the woods are considered protected green space. Because of this situation, they had used maybe a third of my backyard when they did outdoor activities like volleyball and badminton. None of this bothered me because their kids are really nice and respectful. Fast forward a couple of years and I am having the backyard renovated. Well, the neighbor apparently had an issue with this because he kept bothering the crew during construction, telling them what they could and couldn't do, saying they were too loud or doing things wrong and claiming that I had asked him to oversee the crew. But spoiler, I didn't. Eventually, the head contractor has had enough and complains to me about the micromanagement. I go talk to the neighbor and he is acting like he is doing me a huge favor by keeping them in line but agrees to back off. And he does for about 2 days. I get an alert on my ring on a day the crew is off and there was my neighbor on my patio picking up, inspecting and throwing down some pavers that had already been laid. I tell him to kindly get the F off my property and he proceeds to flip me off and walk back to his place. Time for the petty revenge. When we first moved in, I had a whole house natural gas generator put in because power outages are common when thunderstorms roll through. Thing about those is, they are loud when they turn on, and since we were doing the renovation, I planned on putting a living fence in across from the generator to mute some of the sound that would travel to his place. Well, I talked to the head contractor and we happily agreed to shift the trees from the generator down to the woods and essentially cut off his property from my property. The neighbor was not happy about that move and called the city surveyor to dispute the property line. However, my contractor had made sure that we were fully on my property with about 8 inches to spare to account for tree growth. End result, neighbor pissed but powerless. I have some nice trees to look at in the backyard and there's nothing to stop the symphony of my generator when it kicks on every week to do a status check. And guys, that might have been in the petty revenge category, but in my opinion, that was planned like a pro revenge, or even better than some of the nuclear revenge stories we have seen so far. Absolutely amazing. Grandpa's petty revenges. First, I will state that these petty revenges are not my own but belong to my grandpa in his youth and are now over 100 years old. He died before there was an internet but often shared these stories and more with his grandchildren and also recorded them in a hand-typed retelling of his life. So let's start. Grandpa's first petty revenge story is called Satan Jones. The cast of characters: Duck is my grandpa because his real name starts with D, Frog is his father because his first name starts with F. Satan Jones is the bully. This was his actual nickname, but no one still living can identify him from it. I know, I have tried for decades to track him down and learn his fate, but with no luck. And I know exactly where and when these events happened, which I won't be sharing here. Anyway, the background: in Duck's day, the rule of the land was all children must attend school until they either turned 18 years old or graduated the 8th grade. Because of this, the 8th grade tended to be filled with older kids, 16 and 17-year-olds, biding their time until they turned 18 and left school for good. Duck had a plan. He did well at school and entered the 8th grade at the ripe age of 13. He was going to graduate early and be done with school years ahead of the other kids. This plan would ultimately backfire since Frog made him continue on to high school and a high school diploma, which in those days was worth about as much as an associate's degree is today. So the setup When he started the 8th grade, he was both the youngest and smallest in his class. He quickly learned that his class was ruled over by a big 17-year-old boy that all the kids called Satan Jones. Duck would later explain in some detail how the boy had earned such a diabolical moniker. I simply will not report here a word of it, don't ask. This part of the story always made me ill and remains with me to the grave. I'll just say that he was capable of extreme cruelty to both humans and animals and likely would have been in juvie for most of his adolescence if he was growing up today. Let's just say that he earned the nickname. During one of the first recesses in the new grade, Duck was playing marbles with some of the other kids his age from the lower grades, and he was doing well. He had won some beautiful marbles and grown his already considerable collection. As the bell rang to return to classes, Satan Jones walked up and declared all the marbles to now be his. Duck said, "No!" and covered the uncollected ones with his hands. I will give a warning here that this next part does have some violence in it. If that is not your thing, skip to the next section. Satan Jones laughed and then stomped down hard, pinching Duck's fingers between his boot and the marbles. It hurt to high heaven. Duck jumped back and howled, and Satan Jones started to gather up his winnings. Duck was not having it, seeing a broken pile of bricks from an ongoing bit of construction nearby. Duck picked up a chunk about the size of a baseball and pitched it at the bully's head. I know, a kid today will get kicked out of school for throwing a snowball. These were different days. And this is not the revenge. The pitch was true, and the chunk of brick bounced off of Satan Jones' head and knocked him cold. Now, it is not unusual for an injury to the head to produce an inordinate amount of blood. Duck saw the boy collapse and he saw the blood. He feared the worst. The marbles no longer seemed important. He turned and ran home 1 or 2 miles or 3 kilometers. When he got there, Frog knew something was not right and asked his son why he was home so early. Duck: "I killed Satan Jones." Frog: "What?" Duck: "I killed Satan Jones." Frog got his son to calm down enough to get the full story and then returned back to the school with him. When they got there, it became clear that while Satan Jones was obviously concussed, he was not dead, to Duck's great relief. And now the act. Sometime later they were playing baseball. As Satan Jones and Duck were the best pitchers out of all the boys, they were on opposing teams. When Duck came up to bat, Satan Jones hit him with the ball. Okay, that sometimes happens in baseball. It is a walk and Duck took his base. Next time Duck came up to bat, the same thing happened. Duck started to understand that his bully was intentionally walking him just so he could get away with pummeling him with the baseball. And now my grandpa's petty revenge. The next time Duck came up to bat, he knew exactly where that ball was going to be aimed. As it was pitched, he stepped back and took a swing. And to everyone's surprise, the ball was a line drive down the middle, hitting Satan Jones in the head. Duck made base before the ball could be collected. Now Duck always claimed that this was all a bit of better than average luck. He had barely caught the ball with the bat and was in no position to have directed its course. Satan Jones, on the other hand, was completely convinced that Duck had done it on purpose. After that, he proved that bullies are basically cowards. He left Duck alone. Duck never saw him again after that school year. And now Grandpa's second revenge, the shed with the metal roof. The cast of characters is still Duck, who is my grandpa, Frog his father, Neighbor Brats are the boys next door, and Neighbor is their father. Background: it is now a couple years later and Duck is in high school. He has taken some classes in electricity and has purchased a few large batteries. Batteries in this time period were not as predictable as they are today. Different voltages and amperages with practically every design. Most of them used the same chemistry as the batteries used in automobiles today. The act: it was fall, the nights were getting cold even though it was still nice and warm during the days. Duck's neighborhood was rustic, they had no electricity and no indoor plumbing. And outhouses in the cold nights of fall can be more fun than they are worth. Not only did you have to get dressed and bundled up to go to them, but you then had to get undressed enough to do your business in the cold. The Neighbor Brats had come up with a solution. Their house was close to the property line, and while a fence and a shrub separated it from a metal roofed shed on Duck's family's property, there was not that much between the upstairs window and the roof of the shed. And that upstairs window was the Brat's bedroom. so at night they had started relieving themselves out of the window and onto the shed's roof. Now you can imagine how much of a stink and a mess this was making. Frog talked it over with the neighbor, but nothing changed. Duck talked it out with the boys, but as soon as the night was cold, they would do it again. Finally, Duck had enough. The petty revenge, Duck wired a metal window screen and placed it on the metal roof of the shed. On the other side of the wires, he connected clamps and then waited out of view on the back side of the shed. After waiting what felt like an eternity, the moment came. The window was heard opening. The trickle started. Duck connected the clamps to the battery array he had built. A tiny buzz and a little tingle in the air, followed by zit and a yelp. After a few moments of silence, the window closed again, never to reopen on a cold fall night, and Duck unhooked the clamp. The neighbor brats decided after that the inconveniences of using a cold outhouse was better than their alternatives. They never used the shed roof again. Duck left the screen up there, just in case they figured it had something to do with it. And guys, I don't know about you, but for me, I always loved the awesome stories my grandparents would tell me when I was younger. However, if your grandparents also told you some awesome stories, please feel free to share them in the comments or on r/ripe stories on Reddit, which is our own subreddit. If the story you posted on r/ripe stories is interesting, there is a good chance that I might read it in a video. Thank you so much in advance. And the next one is titled, Puncture My Tire, I Will Puncture All Your Vehicles. This took place 15 or 20 years ago. I was invited to play poker at a friend's of a friend's house. I had never met the host and never been there before, but I knew most of the people. The house was only a 15-minute walk or a 2-minute drive from my place, but I had never been on that cul-de-sac before. At about 3 in the morning, the last of us poured out of the house and into our cars. I felt something was off the moment I sat in my little car, but it did not register. I was very tired. Everyone else left and the host house went dark as I let my car warm up. It was very cold outside. When I tried to pull away, I knew something was wrong. My car was not moving normally. Having hardly moved from my spot, I stopped and stepped out of my car. That is when I noticed I was too close to the ground. By the moonlight I could see all my tires were flattened. My car was sitting on the ground. I sat back inside my car to collect my thoughts and keep warm. That is when I noticed writing in the dew in my rear window. It read, "A few." I got out and stood over my rear window, reading it in disbelief. I looked around my car for other evidence, but found none. The cul-de-sac was mostly empty, but had been full when all the poker players were there. I reasoned it was a resident who thought they owned the road and didn't like us taking up their spots. This was a Saturday night. We all showed up around 9 in the evening, and now it is 3:20 in the morning. It is a public dead-end road. Not wanting to leave my car in this place where it had been vandalized, I drove ever so slowly on flat tires back to my place and parked in my spot. When I got out again, I saw the tires were destroyed from driving on them. It is possible the perps only let the air out of the valves. If that was the case, I had finished the job of completely destroying them and costing myself hundreds to replace them. After a rest at home, I resolved I could not live with this offense, and I reasoned the perp must have been the home I had parked in front of, so I grabbed a pocket knife and hiked back to that neighborhood. At the house I had been parked in front of, there were 3 vehicles in the driveway, a car, then a pickup truck that looked like a dirty, well-used work vehicle, and then another car that looked like it didn't move. Starting with the pickup truck, I used my pocket knife to flatten all 4 tires, and then the car in front of it. I walked off quickly. I never had a reason to return to that particular piece of road again. Fast forward a week later, I see my friend who rented room at the poker house. I asked about parking on his cul-de-sac, and he revealed there were neighbors across the road who battled over parking. He said they went at it fairly often over the previous year. Fast forward 2 months later, still, I see my friend and again ask about parking on his road. This time he wants to know why. So I tell him the above story, and he says, "Oh, that's why. I asked what happened. He said the street has been silent and there hasn't been any fighting for parking in a couple months. A year later, my friend said that night must have been the end of it, as he had never seen or heard fighting again. And yeah guys, that is one way to end a parking spot neighbor dispute, but I have to say that was pretty risky on the side of OP, and definitely I would not have done that personally. If you would have been in that situation, would you have also punctured the tires of that person, as revenge so to say? Let us know in the comments what you would have done. And guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, then please check out my binge watch playlist, which you will see on the left side of your screen, which will entertain you literally for days and probably weeks to come. Listening to that playlist is very much appreciated because it also helps my channel tremendously. In addition, if you still cannot get enough, I would suggest to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more exclusive Reddit videos and early access to my daily content. Thank you so much for your awesome support daily. I am very grateful that you are here every single day. Without you, I would not be able to do this. Thank you so much.